But the long and the short of it is that it sounds, I mean, the CIA memo is the first, which the New York Times got hold of, is the first time that you learned that the information that you were giving to the top command in Afghanistan meant to educate them about Afghanistan, its people, and its politics, was being used to target people that you were having clandestine meetings with.
Well, we had suspicions. For example, we on our website you can see some footage of a terrorist training camp, and within 2 days that camp was taken out. One of our correspondents was dragged out of his car and murdered by one of Hekmatyar's men, Gulab Mangal. We had indications that something was seriously wrong, and since we weren't being informed on what the military was doing, or certain aspects of the military were doing with our stuff, we began to sort of push back. And I have to say this, that the military was also just as eager to crack down on Mike Furlong. They just didn't know what he was doing.
And who exactly was he working for?
He worked for what they called JIWAC, the Joint Information Warfare something operations, which is sort of this benign part of strategic communications, you know, that kind of fluffy change hearts and minds.
Mm-hmm.
And Mike Furlong has a history of sort of bending the rules. As a matter of fact, he bragged that he was king of the gray areas. And what he does is he notices that people don't pay attention to boring things. So if somebody like us is funded for $24 million to provide this very robust 24/7 information service, he started shaving off pieces and nobody notices that. And he kept us away from the contract and the money, so we never saw what he actually was assigning it to. And then he starts bringing people in, and then they start competing with each other. So there was a certain time when he was telling me that he was getting better information out of his Jason Bournes than we were, and we said, we don't care. We don't do that.
So he's a civilian employee or a contractor?
Yeah, he was in the military, and then he came back as what they call an SES, which is a general-level civil servant.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a government employee. And one humorous thing is that I could never figure out either what he was saying or what he was doing. And I remember asking one of his coworkers, who were also eagerly trying to stop him in his tracks, to go into his office and ask him, what is on his desk? And they said, nothing. And I said, well, where is he? We don't know. What does he do? Well, we've never figured that out. So if you remember that movie Office Space with the guy with the stapler, I think his name was Milton,
mm-hmm.
You know, to me that's Mike Furlong. He's just a guy that comes in, but he was actually fired years ago. But people still think he works somewhere.
Yeah, but somehow or other the Department of Defense gave him charge of the $24 million. You guys, you and the former head of CNN pitched this idea. They funded it to the tune of $24 million, and you got small...
We never saw a penny of it. So what happens is that when a general orders something, he can't just get it. He has to go to a contracting officer, which is what Mike Furlong was operating as. But a contracting officer can't tell you what to do. He just makes sure that the client gets what they ordered. And that way they keep people's fingers out of the cookie jars. But when that client disappears and the contract administrator still has control over the money, then there's nobody watching. So what he did is he set up this company called IMV, International Media Ventures, which originally was a foreign-owned company that made video games and social networking stuff. And he turned that into a strategic communications company and drove all this money through that company. So when we found out that our contract had finally been approved, but we weren't on it, magically this company called International Media Ventures out of Tampa surfaced with all these ex-Delta Force knuckle-draggers saying that they were in the business of strategic communications. So it sounds like a bad film script, but that's exactly how it worked.
And how come Petraeus and these people at the top put up with this, or you just didn't find out until too late? What happened there?
You know, here's the thing, Ian. I wrote the book on what the CIA does and what the military does with contractors to bend the rules. And I went back to the dirty wars, and I went through all the various committees to kind of clean that up and all the blackwaters and all the things that you keep popping into the news. There is a certain group of people within the military that has to do covert things with overt money. And they just don't get it. They just, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, because if you're trying to trick the enemy, why would you want to publish everything? But the problem is that the general needed what we were providing, so that got sandbagged, and instead this sort of haphazard, Jason Bourne operation flourished, and now is dead. So now what's happening is that people like Major General Flynn don't have the basic information they need to make decisions, if you've read his recent memo.
Sure. Well, he's the head of intelligence for ISAF, for the NATO forces, and he complained bitterly about the quality of the intelligence he was getting, that nobody knows anything about Afghanistan, the people, the tribes, and most of all, the Pashtuns, the people that we're fighting.
Which is exactly what we were hired to provide. So you see, it's a small world and it's a closed circle.
So are you still doing AfPax?
Well, we parked it. If you go to the site, you see it kind of fell asleep about 3 or 4 months ago when we found out about this whole Furlong thing. We hope to be working back in Afghanistan, and we hope that the end result of all this publicity is that people realize there are cheap and effective ways to find out what's going on the ground in Afghanistan, and you don't have to kill people to make a soldier smarter and safer. And I have no problem with whatever clandestine and covert activities that keep the predators working overtime in Pakistan. I'm just saying I'm not in that business.
Right, but it sounds like the cowboys are out there waiting in the wings, and they snap up anything that's
Exactly. Well, I feel like the new kid who had his lunch money stolen, by the bully. Because I guess I was a little too trusting, a little too naive, and the old hands snapped it out of my hands. But
you mean like Dewey Claridge, for example? You think he got properly paid, as opposed to you guys got stiffed? So.
Well, I don't think we got stiffed. I don't hold any grudges. I'm not on a vendetta. I didn't call the New York Times. They called me. But the point is, I want our country to know what's going on in Afghanistan, and I want soldiers to be more comfortable on the ground and in their environment. And that's our side of the business. Now, if people want to get involved in spying and clandestine activity, there's an entire division that does that all day long. We don't work for them. We don't talk to them. We have nothing to do with them.
Well, it sounds like neither did Furlong. He's a wannabe, isn't he?
Well, yeah. I mean, he's a former ranger, but he essentially works as a civil servant in an information organization. But there is a feud between the CIA and the DoD. I mean, they just don't feel like they're getting what they need out of the CIA. And there are some legal restraints because even though most of the Taliban and insurgents and weapons and IEDs flow from Pakistan into Afghanistan, the military is not allowed to operate inside Pakistan. That's only the CIA, who then works with the ISI, which is the Pakistani intelligence service, who decides who gets killed and who doesn't get killed. So I hate to sound like devil's advocate, but the Furlong idea was actually a very good idea. In other words, go around all the obstructions and deal with the people as you need to deal with them. It's just that it broke numerous laws, and it's going to get a lot of people in trouble.
Well, as I say, I'm concerned for you that if you show up in a war zone, how do you retain your independence, which is what kept you alive all these years? Yeah,
insurgents don't believe what they read in the New York Times.
Right.
They believe what they see and do, and I think my 20 years of being in these places, or even my time back with the Taliban in 1995 onwards, people know who I am. So just because somebody writes a story and said, oh, he could have been involved in this, I've stayed in their homes. I've seen their children. I've eaten their food. I don't have any problem maintaining my reputation or credibility.
Well, I thank you for joining us here today in Los Angeles, Robert Young Pelton.
My pleasure, Ian. Bye.
Bye-bye.